Proverbially, music is the art which interrupts the silence. In nature, we have wind, we have birds, we have life. The birds sing, most likely communicate. The combination of sunlight, sunset, shadows and lights creates a sense of being in immersion in life. Like on the sea side, there is a sense of eternity of the elements of nature, the waves, the wind, the different tides. This giant clock that keeps on going while we pass by for few turns of the dial in our lives compared to the eternity of the great before and the unknown future. And I find that beyond philosophy or science, music brings solace to the soul because it consoles from the frightening sizes of the elements, time, space, and then our time, our life, our feelings, our anxiety, excitements, hopes, joys, beliefs, ultimately believes in an afterlife which fuels behaving in this life or acceptance of this life the way it is, or therefore of any life. And music is not a soundtrack of life, it's not an imitation of nature. I think it's a psychological inner world which echoes with our psyche, how we react to violence, to excitement, to desperation, to fear, to hope. Naturally, if I didn't have a probably perfect pitch at birth, I might have been not so sensitive without knowing at an age before knowing how to read what you learn from the mother tongue by ear, what this interval or this combination of sounds produces at levels that you cannot explain yourself, but you sensorially, expressly feel it. You cannot word it, if ever, but not in the early childhood. It's sensorial. And I find it very profoundly healing to hear, as if I could take it on musical dictation, as some did, the songs of the birds, which I hear as music because I don't understand the purpose of their statements. Then again, phonemes are like notes of music, and then when the music makes sense, if you have a dissonant chord, a tension interval that needs a release. You feel like you're in fact suggesting some expectation of some relief after some tension. Upbeat, downbeat as well, with the intake and exhaling of air. Singing, the instrument of humanity by essence in our lungs, our vocal cords. And so when we use a language in which we sing, which we supposed to understand, even if singing prolongs the vowels to the point to which you don't hear the consonants as well, but let's assume you understand the song, the aria, the opera, the mass. There is a communication of meanings, not just sounds for sounds, though again they are very pretty sounds. Look at the aria of the Queen of the Night when she goes insane in the plot. She goes to the highest possible notes to reach for a soprano, distracting us from the purpose of the aria, which is to hand the knife to her daughter to kill Zarastro. So music becomes an escapement from the text which the music serves. Music in films or in series or in games is an emotion that is added to highlight or sirloin the storytelling, and it sets a mood. You can do it in one bar of a Schubert song before the singer starts singing, where you soundscape the atmosphere. So is music in a film that suggests of something spooky or peaceful or happy or more subtle than that, a little of each. That's why silent film was considered a perfect art form by the artists of the turn of the 20th century, because it was more like mime dance, where the expression of the faces and the gestures, like the intervals in music, if I put that in correspondence, were evocative of the inner psychological brooding of the characters. Even if there were texts between the images with a written out text of the action, a bit like a aria and recitativo in opera seria, the action and the emotional being of the statement. And so when the film started speaking, then the actors used the expression of the words and the chosen words by the script, like a poet chooses a word for the music of it as well as for the purpose of it in the suggested hints of things which are not necessarily the story itself. And that then was overplayed with faces that evoked the emotion from the silent film times for actors who had to play more soberly. And the same thing can be conveyed for performers when they say the music has everything in the score, just play it. Don't overplay it. Don't overstate it. Just state it. A modulation does its emotional effect. You don't have to add a dynamic change to it. That can be also argued in the way that outside of its time period, the expectation or the enmarvelment about the choices of a tonality or in harmonic modulation or a specific harmonic chord coating the emotion, the bittersweet mood. The innuendos might be lost in today's listening, where music had evolved from those, let's say, 17th, 18th, 19th century into the 20th and 21st, where a lot of the music is atonal, post-tonal, non-tonal. In other words, it doesn't vehicle emotional messaging through the choice of a given interval note, modulation, etc. So then where do we place ourselves? Do we read music? Do we hear music? Do we intellectualize the expression of this language that music is, which evolves within time? Of course, if you speak ancient English and today's English, it's not the same as if you were a scholar and you could read it, or let less dead tongues, and then understand the society, the way of thinking, the organization of the whole way of comprehending the universe according to the language you can read on tablets from the time. In a way, music is also, with lesser distance in time, encapsulated in its own time frame, period, and context, cultural and social, but philosophical and also deeply faithful. And if an opera was a dramatic storytelling, if before that it was an oratorian, and then if today is a film or possibly an interactive AI game, at the root of it is the storytelling. If you're aware of it, you appreciate the way it's told, or disagree because you have a critical background, because you know how it ends. Basically, if it's a bit summary, but factually. And if you read, watch, hear, discover, immerse yourself in an art form storytelling that you understand or even misunderstand, doesn't matter. That at the level on which you perceive it, you can still perceive something, even if wrongly, either because you assume according to what it reassures you to compare to, if you knew something else to which it reminds you of. It's like a model. Or just be fascinated by the novelty of the statement. What is a dissonance versus a consonance changes with eras in music. What is the expression of an inner world or the imitation of the outer chaos of world becomes also something about reflection upon inner music expressions of our deepest humanity, or the collision with life itself. And that is in paintings, it's in ballet, it's in sculptures, it's in films, it's in theater plays, it's in poems, it's in myths. You know, we are nourished by all these elements where you could say ultimately there is no new story to tell because it's all about love, hope, betrayal, death, sorrow, longing, or all combined in a way that it's a variation on the preceding a retelling of the story of humans trying to figure out what's going on around with each other, interacting, or within themselves, interacting with nature. So when people say music is an international language, I find it a little bit of a cliche, because I don't know there is an international language. There is a system like grammar, like syntax, like the tonal system with its altered variations through centuries that allow different styles as we define them today to express themselves individually in their time frames, but using the same grammatical rules. But the syntax creates also a way of understanding how you structure a sentence, where you place the object, where is the verb, how you delay the verb by putting it after the object or before, or the subject after the verb in order to prioritize the action or the gesture towards whom you express yourself. There is a whole way of structuring the mindset that depends on the syntax of the mother tongue that we speak. Are we only, and not only, obviously, prisoners of this first few years where we absorb this mother tongue and its syntax, not knowing which is which, the ear filtering everything in the neurons and memorizing the phonemes. And then you put meanings to them beyond mama and papa and whatever it is. And then you read and write, not to become a writer. Well, you could. And you read in order to make some kind of own judgment from what you more or less understand that was embedded in the thoughts of others. Same thing with music scores when we say just play what's written, yes, but the intent and the filtered notation that reaches us can be interpreted, therefore translated differently. So keeping away from overly imposing one's personality on the text, or using the text as an objective distanciation from which we hide our own involvement, are, I think, two opposites that might find a middle way in the spontaneity of practicing it, expecting it, sharing it. Chamber music, concerts, recordings, teaching, exchanging, by confronting how we hear it, how we feel it, how we analyze it, how we understand it. And that is as good for texts of literature of the past or the present, as for music, as for understanding the symbols in paintings. And then art historians inform you in a way that you don't see the painting for only what it represents, if it's figurative, but for all what's embedded in it, according to what you're told by those who can decipher it for you. But do you love it more because you get to hear more of those hints? Or do you just prefer to say, leave me just enjoying it like nature? If I don't understand what the birds sing, that's okay. I like the music of it, even if it's not that I don't get the meaning of it. And is there necessarily a meaning to all? Perhaps that's what our mind searches to understand. And perhaps we hear music in whales expressing with each other, exchanging their own thoughts. In the silence of our thoughts, we can read by ourselves a book and imagine a whole film that has never been shot. That is our individual film. because we tend to fantasize imagination from elements that we read, not only pure thoughts, though, yes, mathematically and objectively, there are some of these situations where the mind can construct logics or construct fictions, and the composer, in a way, brings their own fictions into the listener's inner world, and they interact without really explaining. If you're really a great aficionado of a specific style, then you discover the subtleties between the different bands, groups, time periods. Is it jazz? Is it rap? Whatever it is, you become knowledgeable. But at the get-go, like the early mother tongue, it's the ears that heard it, and that penetrated the window of our psyche. Reject it or accept it. I find all these reflections very necessary because they people our inner filter of the world. Tolerance for difference, decisive action with opinion, desire to share with students or audience in the case of a musician or colleagues. Music is a craftsmanship in the making. It's not a science, though it has some rules, but it's more about organizing freely your own world from inside out. Of course, the problem is that if you're opaque to the others, then they cannot come to you and understand you. It's like watching a foreign film without subtitles in a language you don't speak. Then again, the music triggers, instead of the meaning, the phonemes, the music of the words, the poetic way. But if you understand the words, perhaps then you don't hear enough the sounds themselves. You don't think as a linguist, you just hear as a person who talks and hears and reads a language they're familiar with, either as a second, third, or whatever language acquired after the mother tongue, referring to their mother tongue or not in their expression, but it might be that some are able to have several grammatical and lexical individual thought processes. And therefore, I admire when people organize the sentence according to the importance of the word that they want to impress on us when we listen to it, which is what poets do. And Mademoiselle Boulanger used to speak in music of la note choisie, the chosen note, not only the pitch but the placement, and how it comes as a refreshing or repeating or before the statement, under preparing. And it can be justified in each of these cases if that is what the storytelling is about at that point. You go from the detail in question to the whole, which is mind-boggling when it's a large-scale work. But every word starts with a phoneme, and then with syllables, and then with sentences before they become paragraphs in some kind of organization of thoughts that leads you to pages and more, chapters and books and volumes. And why all that? Because there is so much to say with every element from the nano to the maxi. You maximize your thoughts through the nano details. And same thing for music. Every note is a note, but it's the way you combine them that touches your soul, heart, mood, atmosphere, differently, not necessarily as expected by the provider, either the performer, either the composer, in case they're not the same, through a film or a ballet choreography or a video game or just music on its own, where you close your eyes and, like the sounds of nature, they tell you a story which is mysterious and full of solace at the same time, except, of course, when from the quiet moments like this, you'll get to the storm and the rain and the thunder. And the seasons and the longing for the return of the clock of time, from seasons to larger time periods. And I find that music is a very helpful tool to use it as an inner reflection about our world, our inner world, compared to the outer world. It's not about naivete or only about malice or possibly about sarcasm, though it has its own literary qualities to describe this kind of storytelling, or it can be multi-layered in several dimensions of what you perceive from what is hinted, or perhaps there is no something hinted and you think or you read too much between the lines. Sometimes the music notation leaves you to wander. So limit or travel in your wander. And if you're too much free, you're considered not respectful of the text, and if you're too much only reciting the text, you're considered not enough artistic, which is subjective for everybody's point of view, where they are placed. Ravel used to consider interpretation as a betrayal of his own music, but objectively, there is no notation that defines every detail. Therefore, something is left to be rediscovered, retold, restated, not necessarily for the sake of being different or even eventually provocative, just the way you go through it, your experience with this art form, your experience with nature. Not everybody has the same experience of nature, of music, of a given art form. Music is beyond an escapism. Probably escapism for a musician is when it's no music. But I think music plays in your mind, plays in your soul, plays in your reflections, that you're aware of or not, that you can capture it or not, that you can notate it or not. De facto, we're all composers, we're all writers, we're all fiction storytellers, we're all love story actors. We are expressing our humanity, and music is somehow the conversation through the soul rather than only through, of course, the demonstration of making it virtuosity, dance, playfulness, entertainment. It's a necessary explosion of the senses, but the introspection of a daydream, of a thought, of a musical language that speaks what words cannot always define unless you're master of words. Like Victor Hugo used to not want people to set his words on music, saying the music is in the words. Not everybody is Victor Hugo. But even so, the purpose of this is to exchange. I'm trying to find gauche words to define it. And I don't master the words, I don't master anything really. I try to bring myself to harness a little bit of what my soul captures since I'm born, and how some of its storytelling might be meaningful, hopefully not boring, and mostly not appalling to others. In fact, the humility is to be convinced without to be imposing, to be convinced through your faith or through the whatever is bigger than you in dimension, time, space, that nature brings you to reflect upon so easily, because it brings you back to your passing being on this dial of seasons on the planet. But each moment is so meaningful and captured and shared, and then becomes a dear memory and a perfume, a gaze, an expression, a word that somebody meaningful told you stays in you like a melody, a harmony, like a scene in a film, like an adjective chosen in a story which you read and that triggered something in you that you cannot define, but that either moved you, excited you, or perhaps you reacted to it. Regardless, you're alive, and alive is soul, and soul is something that we cannot not only not define, but that through music, in a way, we connect to a certain eternity, even with musics which correspond to their time frame in which they were conceived and heard, and with a given purpose or not, to pray, to dance, to excite, to war, to peace, to love, to compete. In fact, it is in a way the soundtrack of life. It's in spontaneity, and it's also in its construction. When you construct a piece, it's like you construct a poem, like you choose to frame in a painting something, descriptive or not, that you dare leave after you for some others to see what in their eye of the beholder it will mean to. It's very humbling, and it's not something that you pretend to pontificate over. In fact, the humility is to let it just exist and hope that somebody will pick it like a fruit and will smell it or taste it, might say don't like it, might not even notice it, since most of the beautiful and sometimes very meaningful music from centuries past has been lost in time, and we constantly cherish the few very replayed pieces. But even so, they mean so differently to each who plays them that it's a new rediscovery. Even for those who already receive them by knowing them, they rediscover them through your reading, because then Yes, the text is there, but it's what you involve yourself in the words of the text. And I still think that there should be an allowed tolerance for expressing oneself without being the writer over the writer, or the composer over the composer, or the director of the film over the director. No, it's about extending your horizons in your inner dreams and thinking that every word, every note can be a whole life encapsulated in as a message in a bottle in the sea. And with age, you might discover things differently than when you discovered them younger. Perhaps young age is the essential moment for everything: life, discovery, love, and at the same time, it remains mysteriously innerly calling. And even with experience, you don't know better. You let yourself be captured by it, captivated by some new piece, new writing, new book, new film, new storytelling, new form of storytelling. Which art form you think is not corresponding to your awareness between classical ballet and rap? There is so much that humanity have chosen at different times, points of their life to express themselves. In fact, it's only the voice of humans, meaning the thoughts of humans through their voice, would it be musical or written or pictorial or animated. The transmission for a teacher is not only asymmetrical from the knowledgeable person to those who has to receive it, but it's also an exchange through their intuition about it, because it means to them differently what it means to you. And if you hold on it, then you're rigid and you say, this is the only way. No. Well, perhaps. True humility is painful to accept because you like with age to build structures, intellectual, emotional, ideological, because life taught you lessons. People lied to you, betrayed you, or people left or died. And you continue this journey until whenever it's going to last, and you try to make sense of it. And sometimes I find that really music is a good companion for all human expression, soulful. Music is an individual endeavor, like thinking. You can neutralize it, but it has to start from within, either as a reflection of somebody else's musical thought, like philosophical thought or literature thought or poetic thought, or the reaction to an emotion by the fact of life: joy, happiness, sadness, sorrow. I find it true that ultimately music is shared like a language, but rather the thoughts than the music itself. Of course, there is the spectacular virtuosity if you're a concert pianist. There is the remoteness of the composer who, by essence, normally you don't see compose. You hear their music on its own or within a storytelling. Then you have the music thinkers, historians, analysts who evaluate it scientifically, organize it, shape it, teach it so that you can structure the awareness of centuries of evolution of classical music in the Western tradition until today's explosion of idioms in music. And in its time, every music was its own time's music, and very little was carried and knowledgeable about the music of its predecessors. There was the immediacy of the now. And then today, in comparison, we have niche specialists or generalists who can give you a timeline of the evolution of a genre through centuries, who can give you an understanding of the culture of how music developed away from the Western tradition in terms of the classical polyphonic music into other ethno-musicological awarenesses. I find that fascinating. And then you have ultimately the performers, besides the thinkers and the creators. To the people who hear music, it doesn't matter really who wrote it and who plays it. In fact, it's humbling not to consider owning it. No more than one's students, than one's works, than one's own compositions even. It's a gift to humanity. I mean, I know it sounds not very humble to say, but by essence, it's the trace that we leave from our passage, for whatever it's worth to whoever it is worth. The technique to play music is nothing to do with the philosophy of music. It's to do with learning to organize your skills, the brain cells, through memorization, muscular memory, through reproduction, reactivity through the breath, the fingers, the singing, the instrument, the technique. All these being means instead of ends on their own, even if competitively you can compete among musicians, subjectively, of course. But regardless, the ultimate purpose of music is like in nature. It's the silence that's interrupted when it arrives and then it disappears. The silence continues. The silence of the introspection and the shared introspection. We could agree to disagree about this interpretation of this performer or the value of this composition compared to whatever was written before or before what will be written after and classify or declassify and say, it's not that meaningful. And so who gives us this importance to evaluate what is from what is not meaningful or to be kept? The value system is built by the eye of the beholder, the ear of the beholder. Is a fugue, a Baroque superior polyphony of conversation between equals in contrapoint, then a melodic line with an accompaniment in a Schubert song? No. I think they are just different expressions of human soul, mind, psyche. We tend to think that more spectacular is more appealing, more introspective might be more boring on the short-term view of things. Or perhaps that's the evolution of humankind, to not be able to concentrate long time on something more austere. Perhaps we're afraid of our own vacuity. And that is human nature, it probably always was. Don't they say that children who are bored become great discoverers? Out of boredom comes thinking. After thinking comes imagining. If the imagining, especially when it's not harnessed by knowledge, seems illimited, and then afterwards it's limited by the supposed way of things, the way they are, or they have been. Once upon a time, I was not a child prodigy, I was just a little old man who was having a mesmerized immersion in sounds combinations. I didn't know what I was doing, and my parents didn't show me off, as some parents do to children prodigies, because it is appealing to people to look at monsters. As if you stepped beyond the boundaries of a timeline. But in fact, the intuition, as strong as it is, doesn't replace knowledge, and knowledge doesn't create more intuition. Knowledge is sort of the answers to questions you asked yourself because of the curiosity that the intuition brought you in the first place to ask, if you can answer them. Through treatises, through teachers, through exchanges, through observations, through imitations, through rejections or adorations, or through time change who you adore to whom you reject in a given field, for a given genre, in a given style, in a given research. But it all doesn't change the fact that music coexists with itself, not replaces a theory of a given mathematical equation or conjuncture. It's just there. And we classify it as old-fashioned, neo this, neo that, or modern, or contemporary, or Baroque, or classical, or medieval, or Renaissance. It's our classification. We name things that is more practical to determine, though they don't all fit perfectly in our collection of knowledge, because some overlap, some overstay, some are more ahead. Debussy, Brahms, who's to say? And I think that beyond chronology, it's the meaning that you receive from the pieces that you play or hear or study or record or learn or teach or conduct or organize together with other art forms. Ultimately, you create imaginariums. The spontaneity is replaced by knowledge, but in the case of intuition that people call talent, or they don't know what to call it. Is it a calling? Is it like a predisposed awareness, a sensitivity towards a form of art that you have no idea about, but that you seem to be drawn to? But you don't know why or how. You sort of vaguely feel it, and if you don't acquire any technique, it reminds you that it's sort of a pastime at best. course, in the old days, before electricity, you had to play everything by yourself musically in order to enjoy it, unless somebody passed by your area to play it, and that was rare. Today, music is everywhere in recorded formats, and in a certain way it exists besides you and beyond your own life. And then the performers become composers of their piece, being not their own, but the way they immortalized it through what it meant to them. And some people would say, when they're aficionados of a given work, I only listen to it played by such and such, because that's how I like it, or it's supposed to be. And teachers do that too sometimes. And while I know what I think it's supposed to be, I personally remain as strongly as possible humble. But it's a courage that is rare to hold, because you have to have the courage to, because after all, music, even recorded, is ephemeral. It goes back to the silence from which it came. Okay, you can replay it today electronically, but outside of context, outside of a form of statement within which you express it. Intimacy calls for a certain dialogue, and a speech calls for another form of dialogue in the text, in the style, and the erudite knowledge of the capacity to be convincing oratorian. Same with music. It's very intimate while it's very public. And if it's shared with many at the same time, and not everybody captures differently, the different elements, perhaps the melodic, perhaps the rhythmic, perhaps the philosophic, perhaps nothing, perhaps they're just bored. It's too long, too repetitive. Doesn't have lyrics. I don't know what it means. What am I supposed to know? When am I supposed to upload? Okay, that's very basic. If you're knowledgeable enough and you went to hear a concert, then you have some kind of idea of what the genre commands. Like when you watch a ballet, or you want to watch a opera, or a symphonic concert, or a string quartet performance. It's like you go to a pizzeria not to have seafood. Or if you could, then fine. But then same thing about genres in music, styles in music, expression in music. It becomes so easy today to juggle through so much offerings that at best you don't care, and at worst you're overwhelmed. But in the past, until the end of the 19th century, to hear music, you had to learn how to play it. So you had the piano, which is an instrument that allows you to access all genres that cannot be played on a single voice instrument. So you inevitably played it wrongly, or badly, or poorly, perhaps greatly too. But you dealt with it. It's like, you're not a chef because you follow the cookbook, because no matter how many details are given, there's something about proportions. And why the sauce picks up one day and the other day it doesn't. So many elements come in account. So the more you know, the more you're aware, the more you're picky, the more you're aware. And that's the same thing with music. The more you hear, the more you like it. This guy or this woman plays too much rubato. This is not enough. I just want the music, not them playing it. And when you had to play it yourself, the interpretation was a little bit secondary, because you just had to basically read the notes, then find fingers to not play the wrong notes. or avoid them as much as possible. So you had took lessons, then you were bored because was not fun learning, and you gave up. Then somebody comes and plays, and you go, wow. But ultimately, I think that I learned most from people who were simply honest about their art form. Of course, you like to be liked, so you don't go on stage in front of people, even if it's a jury to judge you or an audience to hopefully love you or like you or criticize you or accept you or say you're not as good as you're supposed to or you used to or you... Okay, you put yourself in danger. And because there is some kind of, not fragility per se, but it's a little bit of vulnerability to the fact that music is ephemeral. No matter how you performed it, it's not going to come the same way after. So many factors: the instrument, the acoustics, the mood, the atmosphere, the moment, the action, the keyboard for a pianist, the pedals, the acoustics. I mean, so many things. The fingerings, the phrasing, how you manage to be secure or reliable or not for some sections which are written awkwardly or difficultly, even if it's smartly written by pianist composers or non-pianist composers. Regardless, whatever you have to go through, and then you realize that you messed up, more or less or more. Then you hope the next time, if there is a chance, you'll do it better because you cherish the piece enough to want to serve it at best, honestly. And that is something that demands a lot of strength of character, because unlike a painter who doesn't repaint their painting every day the gallery opens, you do as a pianist. Even if you have ideas, experience, knowledge of how it goes, there are variables that some people don't bear with, like Gould when he decided to only record rather than perform because he didn't want to be, that's what he said, depending of the situations, circumstances. But then at the same time, if you play, anytime you play, even the same piece, it comes out differently because you are retelling it. And it means to you perhaps differently. It reveals itself to you at different levels, like when you reread a book or you rewatch a film. All of a sudden you see things you didn't see before. Or perhaps you saw them, but they didn't strike you. Perhaps you're taken by the storytelling rather than the how of the storytelling, and therefore you can appreciate it more. I don't say that you appreciate it more because you can read music. Even rehearing it without reading it allows you to enter deeper levels. But the strength of character is to admit that no matter how much repetitively you prepared it, it's going to come out as it does, which is to say, deal with the unexpected. The role of the teacher is to enhance the availability of something redundant and constantly reliable, that is fingering, phrasing, pedaling. So the mnemotechnic memory of all that allows you, but then all pianos don't sound the same, the action doesn't feel the same, the tempos don't go the same, there's so many aspects. Sometimes, miraculously, after so many years of knowing the piece, practicing the piece, retrying to play the piece, it comes out just right. Perhaps you just know it yourself, but it's enough to make you feel like all this effort towards the bettering of one's own craft reaches an artistic level that might match the love we have and respect and admiration for the piece we serve beyond the composer and the style and the genre. It's just the communion with the work. It talks to us as we respond to it, through the text, through the resonance, through the instrument, through the sharing with the audience. Music is a mysterious companion from within, which we exteriorize so easily. But I believe that it's meaningful when it brings food for thought for the souls of others, without pretending it, just being it.